जय प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा जय नित्य लीला प्रविष्ट ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य स्तोत्र सद श्री श्रीमद भाई चरणारविंद भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। जय नित्य लीला प्रविष्ट ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य स्तोत्र सद श्री श्रीमद भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती ठाकुर श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। जय नित्य लीला प्रविष्ट ओम विष्णुपाद श्रील गौर किशोर दास बाबू जी महाराज की जय। जय नित्य लीला प्रविष्ट ओम विष्णुपाद श्रील सच्चिदानंद भक्ति विनोद ठाकुर की जय। जय नित्य लीला प्रविष्ट ओम विष्णुपाद वैष्णव सर्वभौम श्रील जगन्नाथ दास बाबू जी महाराज की जय। श्री गौरीय वैष्णव गुरुवर्ग की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्री वसति गौर भक्तवृंद की जय। गंगामय की जय, जमुनामय की जय, भक्ति देवी की जय, तुलसी देवी की जय, अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। निताय गौर प्रेम Nande Hari Hari Bol. All glories to Samudavaris Hare Krishna. All glories to Samudavaris Hare Krishna. All glories to Samudavaris Hare Krishna. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, reading today from Granth Raj Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 18, Text 19. Prakalpya vatsam kapilam siddha sankalpanamayim siddhim nabhasi vidyancha ye cha vidyadharadayah Prakalpya vatsam kapilam siddha sankalpanamayim siddhim nabhasi vidyancha ye cha vidyadharadhayah Prakalpya vatsam kapilam siddha sankalpanamayim siddhim nabhasi vidyancha ye cha vidyadharadayah Prakalpya vatsam kapilam siddha sankalpanamayim siddhim nabhasi vidyam cha ye cha vidyadharadhayah Prakalpya vatsam kapilam siddha sankalpanamayim siddhim nabhasi vidyam cha ye cha vidyadharadhayah Kalpaya savapilam siddha sankalpanamayim siddhim nabhasi vidyancha ye cha vidyadharadayah Dhruv Prakalpya vatsam kapilam siddha sankalpanamayim Siddhim nabhasi vidyancha ye cha vidyadharadayah. Mataji's. Prakalpya vatsam kapilam siddha sankalpam namayim siddhim nabhasi vidyancha echa vidyadharadaya prakalpya vatsam kapilam siddha sankalpanamayim siddhim nabhasi vidyancha yecha vidyadharadayah. Prakalpya, appointing. Vatsam, calf. Kapilam, the great sage Kapila. Siddhaha, the inhabitants of Siddhalok. Sankalpana mayim, proceeding from will. Siddhim, yogic perfection. Nabhasi, in the sky. Vidyam, knowledge. Cha, also. Ye, those who. Cha, also. Vidyadhara, Adayaha, the inhabitants of Vidyadhara Loka, and so on. Translation. After this, the inhabitants of Siddha Loka, as well as the inhabitants of Vidyadhara Loka, transformed the great sage Kapila into a calf, and making the whole sky into a pot, they milked out specific yogic mystic powers, beginning with Anima. Indeed, the inhabitants of Vidyadhara Lok acquired the art of flying in the sky. Purport. The inhabitants of both Siddha Loka and Vidyadhara Loka are naturally endowed with mystic yogic powers by which they not only can fly in outer space without a vehicle, but can also fly from one planet to another simply by exerting their will. Just as fish can swim within water, the residents of Vidyadhara Lok can swim in the ocean of air. As far as the inhabitants of Siddha Lok are concerned, they are endowed with all mystic powers. The yogis in this planet practice the eightfold yogic mysticism, namely yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. By regularly practicing the yogic processes one after another, the yogis attain various perfections. They can become smaller than the smallest, heavier than the heaviest, etc. They can even manufacture a planet, get whatever they like, and control whatever man they want. All the residents of Siddha Loka are naturally endowed with these mystic yogic powers. It is certainly a very wonderful thing if we see a person on this planet flying in the sky without a vehicle. But in Vidyadhara Loka, such flying is as commonplace as a bird's flying in the sky. Similarly, in Siddha Loka, all the inhabitants are great yogis, perfect in mystic powers. The name of Kapila Muni is significant in this verse because he was the expounder of the Sankhya philosophical system, and his father, Kardama Muni, was a great yogi and mystic. Indeed, Kardama Muni prepared a great airplane, which was as large as a small town and had various gardens, palatial buildings, servants, and maidservants. With all this paraphernalia, Kapila Dev's mother, Devahuti, and his father, Kardama Muni, traveled all over the universes and visited different planets. And the translation again. After this, the inhabitants of Siddha Loka, as well as the inhabitants of Vidyadhara Loka, transformed the great sage Kapila into a calf, and making the whole sky into a pot, they milked out specific yogic mystic powers, beginning with Anima. Indeed, the inhabitants of Vidyadhara Loka acquired the art of flying in the sky. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Soyam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvashe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhye Vacha Potitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, today we are continuing our study of Canto 4 of Srimad Bhagavatam. And this verse is a rather spectacular one. And in fact, when we think of the name of this chapter, it's all rather spectacular. Prithu Maharaj milks the earth planet, right? These are all very fantastic things. And we can see the fantastic nature of reality is emphasized here. And there's two things, maybe a philosophical concern, but I think there's two things that are interesting that are drawn out of descriptions like this. One is the inability of people at times to distinguish between material and spiritual, and the other is the natural doubts that sometimes people have when encountering the Vedic literature. And so the first arises because we hear of these things, and whenever people say, oh, I'm into spirituality or something like that, I remember I was at university and it's the beginning of semester, so I'm having to do all of that awful ice-breaking stuff, you know, getting to know all these people that I don't want to get to know, and they don't want to get to know me either, so anyways. And you all have to pretend to get along and then you'll forget each other exists, right? Unfollow each other on Instagram once the semester is done, right? So we're doing all of that, and I remember I was talking to this one guy in one class, and he was like, oh, I'm really into spirituality. And he said, you know, are you into spirituality? And I was like, oh, a tiny bit. And then he said, so, and then he said, you know, what's your spiritual practice? And I said, oh, I do a little bit of bhakti yoga. And then he said, oh, that's interesting. You know, I'm really into spirituality. I do Ashtanga yoga, right? And I said, oh, that's cool. That is spiritual, right? Yoga means to join and connect with the divine. And I said, what's your aim out of it? And he said, oh, you know, in high school I did lots of LSD, I did lots of acid, I did lots of mushrooms. And he said, and I was hearing about how these yogis, they can levitate and they can go to other planets. And he said, I never used to believe in it. And then one day I did a huge amount of mushrooms. And I went to another planet, and that's what he was telling me. He said, and I went to this other planet, and the trees had all of these beautiful fruit growing on them. And he was like, he told me, he said, I wanted to go back. So I thought, you know, before I was doing yoga for fitness, but now I started doing it because I want to be able to travel to these planets again. I said, you know, all glories to your service, Prabhu. You know? But this is an idea of spirituality, right? We have this idea. We see stuff like that, right? And we think this is spiritual life, right? People will say spiritual ideas are things like astrology, and they're things like having all of these different siddhis, right? Flying in the sky, roaming around. But while these things are, in a sense, spiritual, in the sense that one will encounter them in the path to transcend materiality, they are still in relation to this material world. They're still transformations of this material world. To make this body very small, or to make it very large, or to fly in the sky. These are just things that we are not used to seeing. I remember once I was reading a blog article by this one person, and he was from one protected First Nations native tribe, I think in Southern America, right? And for some reason or another, I can't remember the exact story, for some reason or another, he was asked by like his village to leave the village, because otherwise there is a policy that the government doesn't interfere with them, right? So they don't normally encounter technology in the Western sense, right? And so he was writing this blog article talking about now he lives in like some big American city, right? And he said still, every day when he goes and takes a plane flight, to him it's magic. He understands the science now. But growing up completely not desensitized to these things, every time he goes in, he still feels it's magical. He can't believe that it's real, that he can go in the sky and fly like this. At this point, he had received a Western education. He had an idea of the physics, but still in his gut, he thought, how can this be possible? It's sort of like when you show really old people Zoom and Skype, they're like, how is this possible? How has this been achieved, right? And so he has this feeling of bewilderment. And I thought that was rather interesting, because we here are something that we don't really grasp, like people flying in the sky, Kapila Muni having a big spaceship, right? Having a big spaceship with gardens and everything in it, and we think, oh, that's absurd. I've never seen anything like that. But then there's people living today who are having that experience themselves, right? Of living out in reality something that they would have thought earlier would have been completely absurd, would have been completely impossible. So we try to negotiate things within our realm of understanding. We try to negotiate things in terms of what we think is reasonable. And anything that is unreasonable within what we think is possible is spiritual. God must be involved there. Because it's outside of what we think. The supernatural, super means beyond, and natural means nature, right? So it's beyond what I think is natural. That is all supernatural. That is all divine. But because we have this limited perspective, people will often think of things like this as being related to the spiritual domain. And again, in a sense, they are. The yogic processes are part of the yoga ladder to attain spiritual reality. But bhakti and all of the other yoga processes are very distinct. So in this way, all of these things, they are material opulences. And yet, though they're material opulences, that makes it, in a sense, harder to believe when we grasp this. We think, this is not the world I live in, right? Maybe we can accept that maybe it's possible, but we hear it and it sounds fantastical, right? It sounds absurd. How can I believe this? How can I believe that there's a garden floating in space, right? How can I believe that there are people who simply, by thinking, are moving from planet to planet? And we think this is all mythology. And this is a reasonable thing, actually, maybe, to think. Maybe it's reasonable to be critical and to be rational and to think, actually, this is mythological, this is not real. But I remember when I was first trying to study Srimad Bhagavatam, and I was getting up to the 5th canto, right? And I remember reading all the descriptions of cosmology, all the different hells, right? How the earth is held down by these elephants, and all of these different things. And I remember thinking, okay, that's it. Krishna consciousness is over for me. It was really, really cool. The first, everything I was reading up until now was cool, but now, no, thank you. I think I'll go somewhere else. Thanks for all the time, but I think I'll go somewhere, right? And then I actually did think that for a few hours. I was thinking, right? I was thinking, it's over, Bhakta Tilak no more. It's Abhakta Tilak, Nastik Tilak. That's what I was thinking. And then what happened was, in those few hours, I remember reflecting, thinking none of it's true. This whole Krishna idea isn't true. This whole Vaishnavism idea isn't true. This whole bhakti thing isn't true. And as I was going around, I'm just, cooking my meals, I'm not offering it this time, doing all of these things. As I was going around, I realized, as absurd as it might be to think maybe that the earth is flat or the earth is round, I won't open that can of worms, right? As absurd as it might be to believe whatever that is beyond my understanding, it is more absurd for me to think that Krishna doesn't exist. Even if I do think these descriptions are absurd, What is more absurd? That maybe there is something in this world that is beyond my understanding, or that Krishna is not God? What is more absurd? And I was thinking, actually, I will believe that the earth is flat before I'll accept that Krishna doesn't exist. Because Krishna has such a comprehensive understanding of philosophy. And we've been studying already so many cantos, the science of Krishna. So I don't think I need to demonstrate that to anyone here. But I really came with that dilemma. I thought, actually, the reasonable and rational thing to do is to believe the least absurd of two absurdities. If I have two things that seem absurd to me, I have to choose the least absurd one. And it's definitely much more absurd to think that Krishna is not at the center of this reality than it is absurd to think that maybe there is a planet where people can fly in big planes like this, right? As Prabhupada himself has said, we are so impressed by the planes because the planes are still new to us, right? In a few generations, it'll not be absurd to think of much faster travel, maybe space travel, and all of these things that sound fantastical, they become less and less fantastical, right? So these things are possible to be achieved. So in this way, we can think of that. There is another notion that I once heard from one author. And this author, he was speaking about how people these days, they were applying all these scientific and historical methods to try to understand books, to try to understand sacred literature. And he came up with a really, I think, a very sweet story. And in this story, he speaks of a tower, a little tower as part of a castle, right? And this tower used to have an old man who lived inside it. And the old man, every day, he would sip on his tea, and he would read the newspaper, and he would look at the ocean. And every evening, he would see the sunset on the ocean, and he'd see the brilliant, beautiful rays of light reflecting off the water. And every night he would do this. Each night, he would spend up at the top, and then he would go back down, he would sleep, he would wake up, go about his business, and then he would go and then again have a relaxing time at the top of this tower. And then one day, the old man, as old men are prone to do, passed away. He died. And when he died, now his grandson inherited this building. And the grandson was a modern man, not old-fashioned like his father. He wasn't reading the newspaper. He had more important things to do. And being a man of modernity, he thought, I want to understand this tower. And so he brought in all of these great intellectual academics, all of these historians, all of these architectural experts. And they all came in. And what they did is brick by brick, they took each brick and they analyzed each brick. And they saw, how is this building being constructed? And they learned many things, right? They understood that, they thought this building was built 100 years ago, but actually it was built 120 years ago. And then they pulled another brick, and they realized, this is sandstone, but this is granite. And then they said, a different person laid the foundation than the person who laid the next layer of the second story. And like this, they were going, and they learned lots of things about the tower, and they wanted to learn more about the tower. So they took more bricks out, and they started reading more and more, and they learned so much. Modern men. And this boy, he thought, what did that old fool do this whole time? We've learned so much about the history of the location. We were able to figure out which kings conquered which area, right? We were able to figure out who migrated when. We were able to piece together all of these things just by analyzing this properly. And this author, when he writes about this, he ends the story by saying, but what this young boy did not realize is that when you sat at the top of the tower, you could see the whole ocean. When you sat at the top of the tower, you could see the beauty of the sunset. That is what the boy didn't realize. He didn't realize what was the function and the value of this tower. It was not there to be scrutinized and to be analyzed and tried to come up with all of these speculative notions about the nature of it. It was there so that he could see what all of his ancestors before had seen from the top of it. And this is what Srimad Bhagavatam is. It is the tower that if we sit properly, and if we sit in the ways that generations and generations of people have sat at the top of it, we will be able to see a sunset that no one else can see. we will have an angle and a vision that will give us such a beautiful vision that we will not be able to see by scrutinizing and thinking, is this part reasonable? I will believe in this part, I won't believe in that part. With all this skepticism and pulling things apart, we will not be able to see the ocean. We will not be able to see the sunset. So this is the value of Bhagavatam. We will sometimes say, oh, why is this here? This part is not believable, that part is believable. Sometimes you'll hear people will say this, I believe in this part of Bhagavatam, but that part, oh, I don't know. But all we're doing is we're pulling bricks out, and we are not trying to climb to the top of this tower to see the sunset. Does this make sense? So, this is the importance of Srimad Bhagavatam. This is the importance of apparently absurd concepts. And it's not absurd. As Prabhupada has very clearly said, we are doing these things now with our limited science. Right? We don't want to accept that there are beings in the world who have already understood. This is the arrogance of humanity. Right? This is the arrogance of modern civilization. What we have achieved, no one else has achieved. What we have achieved, no human has achieved before. Right? It's not even arrogance against anything else in the world, it's arrogance against humanity itself. This is society at its greatest. I remember when I was in my first lecture, one of my professors came, I think I was telling Kamsari Prabhu this, and the professor came out, and then she said, this course that you're doing now has the highest depression rate out of any course in the university. I thought, this is the glories of modern civilization, right? I remember one person was saying, was asking me sincerely, he said, don't you ever feel, this was at university, don't you ever feel, obviously I have no judgment that you're a Hare Krishna or anything, but don't you ever feel like you feel a little different, you feel like you want to be a normal person? That's what they said. And I said, why would I want to be a normal person? You guys are all depressed and want to die. You guys all hate living. Why would I want to be a normal person? You all hate to exist, right? You hate existence. You look at the normal world, everyone is depressed. You walk and you hear. I would always think this growing up in Port Macquarie in my hometown. To walk to my bus stop, I'd have to walk past the pub, right? And sometimes if I wanted to go visit, if I wanted to visit my friends in some of the neighboring towns, I'd have to walk past this pub at night. And you'd hear everyone laughing and laughing, Every night you'd hear them laughing. And I remember one night thinking, this laughter sounds so much like crying. You can almost hear it if you listen really carefully. Actually, recently I had to go for one graduation thing, and so the professors took us to a pub, very, very sattvic and brahminical, right? So we went, and I remember hearing the laughing, and I thought this was the exact same thing. You will not hear laughing that sounds like crying more in any other place than these heights of enjoyment in the world. And this is the arrogance of modern civilization. A civilization that produces a bunch of depressed people whose laughter sounds like crying, and they'll say, what we have achieved, no one else has achieved. That's true. No one else has achieved such levels of depravity and degeneracy as this society. That is one thing that the modern civilization can claim as their great achievement. They want to say that this is mythology. They want to say that people having all of these mystic potencies is mythology. But what is really mythology? Real mythology is the idea that a person will work very hard, get a good degree, and be happy in this world. What is really mythology is the idea that if I simply move up this big towering building enough levels, I will become happy and I will become satisfied. Again, what is the bigger absurdity? What is more likely to be myth? This we cannot disprove, right? They cannot disprove that there are people in other planets doing these things. They don't have the senses to detect it. At the very worst, you can be agnostic, but we can disprove their mythology, that they will be happy. How? Because they're not happy. They are the proof that their own mythology is mythology. But what is the proof that our mythology is not mythology? It is that the Vaishnavas are happy. It is that the Vaishnavas have achieved something that not all of them, with all of their so-called achievements, can. So in this way, anyways, sorry, I'm being a little bit heavy. But in this way, we can understand what is actually believable. So now when we come to Bhagavatam, we'll find that it is the most believable of literatures. So what do we see here? We see all of these great different achievements, right? through the different processes of yogic mysticism. Yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, right? This is the Ashtanga process, right? Of course, niyama is not so much followed by yogis today, right? But all of these processes, they're actually not so possible. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he's written famously 2 main novels, Jaiva Dharma and, does anyone know the second novel? He's written another novel. Everyone knows Jaiva Dharma, that's a famous one. He's written Prem Pradeep. And Prem Pradeep is not so often studied in the same way as Jaiva Dharma is, because Prem Pradeep is actually a story of these yogis and Brahma Samajis. We might know the Brahma Samaj. It was very big in Bengal. It was this idea that we need to reform Hinduism, get rid of deity worship, get rid of the Bhagavad Gita, get rid of all of these texts, and we just need to believe basically whatever the colonial people are telling us is basically what the Brahma Samaj was. But this Prem Pradeep was refuting these 2 schools, and that's why in general it hasn't had the same shelf life as Jaiva Dharma has, because Jaiva Dharma is discussing an overview of our philosophy. Prem Pradeep is refuting ideologies that today people don't believe so much anymore. You don't run into, how many of us have run into Brahma Samajis, right? So, but there's also a discussion in there of Ashtanga Yoga. It's a sweet story. It's like Jaiva Dharma. There's an Ashtanga yogi, and he encounters a Vaishnav, and he presents his ideas, and then the Vaishnav presents his ideas, and the Ashtanga yogi becomes a Vaishnav. And then the Ashtanga yogi, he goes and he preaches to these Brahma Samajis, and then they become Vaishnavs, and it's very charming, actually. So in this, there's a discussion, and it's very sweet. If anyone wants to see Bhaktivinoda Thakur's analysis of Yama, Niyama, Asana, he goes through for a whole chapter and he shows, no, I have understood Ashtanga Yoga. And he breaks down each limb, each practice of Ashtanga Yoga into its sub-practices and all of these different elements. And then at the end, he establishes all of this. He establishes the glories of Hatha Yoga, Raja Yoga, in order to establish that Bhakti Yoga is a greater form of yoga. But he does say something interesting, and I thought it was interesting. He says that Ashtanga Yoga, while not being the goal, it is useful insofar as it helps us concentrate more. So I remember once I was telling my Shiksha Guru I was struggling to focus while chanting. And he told me to do pranayama before I chanted. And then he told me, but don't do anything else. He said, go to a yoga teacher, learn how to do pranayama. And then I said, okay, Prabhu. And then he said, but don't ask any other questions, just leave afterwards. This is the value, again. If it can help us in bhakti, it is valuable. But if it cannot, it can't have any value. And so in this way, we see that even though we will speak about some things as being material, as some things as being useless, right? As some things being perhaps not valuable on the path of bhakti, nothing is inherently bad in the journey of bhakti. Nothing is inherently worthless. Right? Daivi hiesha gunamayi. Right? We quote this often, and then we talk about transcending, right? Overcoming the material nature. But then we forget that Krishna has also said that this maya, that this nature is daivi, right? Daivi hiesha. Yes, it is to be overcome, but it is also itself spiritual. It is transcendental, right? It is daivi. So this world, it is spiritual in its value, right? This world is not devoid of any value, right? Sometimes we speak about how all of the opulence in this world is simply an anksha of the opulence of Vishnu, right? And we say this in order to glorify the opulence of Vishnu. But also we can think about it in the other direction. Oh, there's a whole anksha of Vishnu's opulence in this world, but we do not see it. So this world, it is not actually ugly. Om Purnam Madaha Purnam Idam, right? And then Daivi Hesha Gunamai. This world is not ugly. The things in the material world are not ugly. They are not useless. They're just being used incorrectly. I remember once, I'm not sure if I said this story before. I remember once Narsingha Kavacha Prabhu, he was coming and visiting me, right? And so he was going to stay with me for a few weeks. And so at the time, I was living, and the person I was living with would sometimes drink coffee, right? Anyway, so what happened is before Prabhu came, I was like running through the whole apartment, trying any trace of coffee, anything stained with coffee, and I was like, put in a big plastic bag to hide it. I thought, I just don't want to have, I don't want to have this uncomfortable conversation. Oh, Prabhu, I swear, I don't drink coffee. So I was going through my whole apartment, and I was grabbing, all the coffee, all like in these 2-minute noodle packets, stuff like that. Anyways, I don't want to throw my flatmate under the bus. Anyway, so I was getting all this stuff and I was putting it in a big bag. I tied the bag up and I hid it in my wardrobe. I remember stressing. I remember at the time Jitendra Prabhu, now Jagannath Dev Prabhu, was texting me, Prabhu's going to arrive in 10 minutes. I'm there running around, grabbing all of this forbidden items, right? Anyways, threw them all into my wardrobe, and then Prabhu arrived, and I said, Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam, all the stuff we do, right? And so I was doing all that, and and then I said, oh, Prabhu, please, such an honor to have you, and so we went upstairs, and then Prabhu, we all know Nrsimha Kavach Prabhu, he's pretty no-nonsense, so he wasn't there for any of my pleasantries, but he was just joking around, and then we went up, and then it was just, he needed to have he has that specific diet that he must have, so he wanted to make a smoothie, and so Prabhu, he asks me, he says, oh, Prabhu, do you have anything to make a smoothie? And I thought, Vaishnav Seva, yes, I do. So I said, you can come, you can use our blender, Prabhu, please. Anything that's ours is yours. And he says, okay. And then he goes and he gets all like these, vegetables and fruits and everything to make the smoothie. And then he says, do you have anything else I can add? And I said, oh, Prabhu, anything in this kitchen is yours. Now that I've hidden everything that isn't. So I said, everything in this kitchen is yours, Prabhu, please. And I see in front of me, he opens, I'll never forget, I can still have it in my mind's eye. He opens the cupboard right here like this. He pulls out this white bag of protein powder. Except when he opens it, it wasn't protein powder, it was unlabeled coffee. So Prabhu opens it and the smell of coffee fills the whole kitchen. And in that moment I thought, oh my God, what I must have killed like 7 brahmanas in my past life. Like what did I do to deserve being in this situation? So I'm there and the smell of coffee is filling the whole kitchen. And Nrsimha Kavach Prabhu just looks at me, and I thought, oh, Krishna, please, just kill me now, like. And then Nrsimha Kavach, and then I go into damage control. I'm like, oh, Prabhu, I don't know how it got there. Well, what is this? So I'm there. I'm trying to justify the presence of this coffee in Nrsimha Kavach Prabhu's hands, right? And then Prabhu, he looks at the coffee. And then he goes and he smells it. And then he says, how beautiful is Krishna, that his energy can produce something that smells as beautiful as this. And then he seals the bag of coffee and he puts it away. And then I just wanted to prove I'm bona fide. So I said, yeah, but we'd smell it, not drink it, right, Prabhu? And he said, and then Prabhu was sort of like, yeah, we don't drink it, Prabhu. I know that. Anyway, so in that moment, I thought, actually, this was, because Nrsimha Kavach Prabhu, he can be pretty pakka, right? But I thought, in this moment, he was really showing something. Daivi hesha gunamai, right? What needs to be transcended in this material world is not the ugliness of this world, because this world isn't ugly, right? An angsha of the beauty of Vishnu is pervading this world, right? That's the whole point of Vibhuti Yoga of the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, is that this world actually has so much beauty in virtue of its connection to Krishna. But we sometimes preach and understand like this. This world is ugly, right? Maya is so ugly. This material world that is so filthy and empty and depraved. But no, the thing that is filthy and empty and depraved is us, right? This world is beautiful. Sometimes we think progress in bhakti means I will hate the world more and more and more. I will see the world, I'll see the trees, I'll see the rivers, and I'll spit at it because it's not the temple, right? I'll look at a beautiful sunset and I'll say, how hideous, But no, progress in bhakti means we love the world more because we see the world in connection to Krishna, right? We see the world in relation to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so whenever we see material things, of course, we should understand that our goal is not to try to grow in any sort of yogic process. But nothing is inherently bad, nothing is inherently wrong, because everything has emanated from Krishna. It is that it has to be utilized properly. So disgust and all of these things, they are not exactly signs of growth, right? And that's why Rupa Goswami has said in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that too much austerity will actually prevent one's growth in bhakti, because it'll harden the heart And when the heart is hardened, it will not be able to be melted by Bhakti Devi properly. If we are not able to feel with our heart, then we will not be able to progress in bhakti. So Rupa Goswami says this. He says, this is why Vairagya is not a limb of bhakti. Vairagya helps us execute the limbs of bhakti because we are so degraded that we see the world and we want to enjoy it, enjoy it, enjoy it. But it is not a limb of bhakti. Because Vairagya on its own actually will render us non-devotional. So this is the issue. Now then, why do we discourage attaining all of these siddhis? Why do we discourage all of these things? It is because in our conditioned state, Janmaishvarya Shruta Shribhir Edhamana Madapuman. What's the next line? Naiva Harti Abhidhatum Vai Tvam Makinchana Gocharam. Right? Obsession with growth, obsession with establishing one's social position, one's mundane knowledge, one's wealth, one's position in society, right? I remember I was recently in India for my grandmother's Shraddh, and there were all these Brahmins there. I'll never forget. There were these, the Brahmins, they work together when they're performing all the pujas and all. And some of the Brahmins are actually they're like the real deal. They were very inspiring to hear Hari Katha from. Like, they were very, like, real devotees of Mahaprabhu. But others, I'll tell the story of one of them. So what happened was, while they were doing the puja, right, one of them, it was his turn to sort of leave. But he was still there standing, and he was sort of reciting the mantras. I could tell they're so, ingrained in his head. But the reason why he left is he wanted to smoke a cigarette. And I'll never forget, he was there smoking a cigarette, and as the smoke is coming out, he's going, Namo Namaha. And the smoke has like this shape. He's going like, Namo Namaha. Yeah, so we'll have this idea of like material birth, so valuable, and he will say, I'll remember he got upset actually, that same Brahmin, because at the end you have to give dakshina, right? They give the katha, you have to give dakshina, and anyway, so I gave him like 10 rupees instead of 20 rupees, and he said, Prabhu, come on. This earth would not exist without the Brahmins. Okay, here you go. Here's another 10. So this Janma, Janmaishvarya, Shruta Shribhir, right? All of these different factors, right? All of these different factors. People take so much pride in them, right? And people want to grow and grow and grow in them. And what happens? Arhati, na eva, right? There is no qualification to worship that Supreme Personality of Godhead, Tvam Akinchana Gocharam, who is so easily accessed, who is so easily able to be reached by those who are exhausted by material existence. Right? So in this way, all of these things are issues, they are obstacles in the path of bhakti. They are obstacles in the path of bhakti because we have the great opportunity. We have the great opportunity in Krishna consciousness to become nobody. We have the great opportunity in Krishna consciousness to become nothing at the lotus feet of the Vaishnavas. But instead we want to become something. And these sort of mystical potencies, they let us feel that maybe I'm something. Wow, so much sense control. Wow, look at all of these magic tricks, right? Look at all of these things that I can achieve, so many great things. And so in our hubris, we give away the treasure of becoming a particle of nothing at the lotus feet of the Vaishnavas in order to become a pathetic floating blob of something in the material world, right? It is in becoming nothing that we taste something substantial. It is not in any structure, again, any Aishvarya, any Shruta, any Shribhir, right? Any Janma. It is not in any of these things that any opulence or any true greatness is achieved. Greatness is achieved in becoming nothing, not in becoming something. And that is why these things become an issue. This is why the material world becomes an issue, because we see the material world and then we think, maybe I can become something. I once... No, that's a point for a little bit later. So what happens is that in our lives, we are constantly trying to become something. We are constantly trying to become something substantial, right? We want to become our own person. We want to have our own name, fame established. And what is that name fame? All different variations of the three modes of material nature, right? This world is like sound, right? It's all these vibrations, and it's vibrating in three notes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. And with these three notes, all the songs that could be sung have already been sung, right? How many different ways can you take these three modes and express new flavors and new ideas? But we are thinking, I will make some unique song. But then at one point in our lives, as we are roaming, making all of these songs, thinking my song will be the one that is heard, at one point, what happens is that we hear a music that's very different to these three notes of Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva. We hear a new type of sound. There's some Shuddha Sattva sound. We hear Kirtan, right? Emanating, and that is a new sound. But in order to join into the sound, we are compelled by it. We think this is a better song than all of the music I've heard with all of these three notes, right, of goodness, passion, and ignorance. It's one note, Shuddha Sattva, but how much depth, how much flavor is in that one note? And how did we hear this Kirtan? Just vaguely in the air on YouTube? No. Kirtan is not contained digitally. It is not contained in music. It is contained amongst the Vaishnavas, right? Krishna Bhakti Janma Mool Hoy Sadhu Sanga, right? The mool, the root of the birth of Krishna Bhakti is Sadhu Sangha. The spiritual master, either in the form of the spiritual master who introduces you to the path, or in the form of the Diksha Guru, or in the form of the Shiksha Guru. At one point, we encounter true Kirtan, and we think this is different than all of these other majestic displays of opulence that I've seen in the world. And then our existence becomes perfect when we strive to serve that Kirtan. The perfection of our devotional service is not when we suddenly find a way to project ourselves again, but simply when we try to become an echo of that Kirtan, when we try to be consumed by that Kirtan and echo it into the world. Not that we have any substantial existence. I think of this sometimes with Srila Prabhupada, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Prabhupada, he said once, he said that he wanted to go to America for 10 years to preach. And he never did. But he wanted to do that. In one sense, we can say he never did. But in another sense, we can say, because his disciple, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, went 10 years plus a few more, right? Of course, we like to think of the active glories of Srila Prabhupada, right? But one of the active glories is that Prabhupada's whole existence is an extension of his spiritual master's desire, right? Prabhupada's glory is that he is an echo of the kirtan of Srila Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada. But how glorious is that echo? So we become infatuated with ideas of, I will establish some great name fame, I will establish all of these things. But these things are all such a lower thing, right? And therefore, substance is required. Otherwise, if we end up being too absorbed in the externalities of things, we will suddenly use them, and use them in bhakti, right? Right now we were talking about how we shouldn't use material things. We should use material things in order to grow in bhakti, but we also should not use things in bhakti in order to grow materially. We should not take the externalities of diksha, the externalities of dhotis, of the externalities of tilak, the externalities of I'm this many years in the movement, I am a senior devotee, I am a life member, whatever you can get. I mean, I don't know anyone who's getting too arrogant about being a life member, but I wouldn't put it past people, right? All of these things, we can use them. These are things in bhakti. We can use them to progress our material ego. We can use them to grow in our material ego, and then they've been violated as well. This is why our great acharyas have emphasized shiksha over diksha, right? Our line is not a line. Actually, when I was in Vrindavan, and this one devotee who's coming with us, he's a new devotee, right? He's coming from a very Pakka Brahminical Vrijvasi family, right? And so he was telling me, oh, I'm so inspired by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, you know, he chanted so many rounds, and he was saying all these things, and you know, it's nice that he was inspired by Saraswati Thakur, and he said, that's why I joined ISKCON, you know. Anyway, so I was talking to him, and then then I think Mrugang Prabhu brought up, yeah, and I love his whole idea of Shiksha Parampara. And again, this person is very, very pakka. He knows all of like these Brahminical rituals very well. And he says, Shiksha Parampara, what's that? And then he said, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is not the Diksha Guru of Gorkishore Das Babaji. And suddenly this devotee, I saw his face drop, and he said, so we don't have a parampara? And he was like, we actually felt really bad for him because we were all honoring Prasad, and the rest of us were like, wow, this Prasad's amazing. And I saw him like depressed, like playing with a little grain of rice on his plate, or, what have I done? But then I was talking to him and I was trying to explain, actually this is a very, very good idea that we train through Shiksha. And then at one point, I was thinking, the irony of this is, what is the parampara? The parampara is shelter in the material world. The parampara is Balaram extending Krishna's mercy into this material world so that we can have some connection to Krishna, because there's no direct connection to Krishna. We cannot approach Krishna. We have to go through the Vaishnav, right? Krishna Prem Jonme Teho, Puno Mukho Ongo, right? After Krishna Prem has arisen, right? Yes, Sadhu Sangha is the birth of bhakti, but after Krishna Prem has arisen, it continues to be Mukho Ongo, it continues to be the Mukhya Anga, the primary form, the primary limb of our devotional service, right? So this is what the Guru Parampara is. It is the primary limb of our whole spiritual existence, because we cannot access spiritual existence, right? This is what the Parampara is. And I was thinking the grand irony of ironies is, here is this person, right? Here is this person not able to take shelter of the Parampara because of a Diksha issue. And how is he getting shelter in the Parampara again? Not through Diksha, through Shiksha, right? What is it that is connecting him right now to our Gauriya Vaishnav Guru Varga? As I'm talking to him, as he's having this doubt, what is connecting him to our lineage? I'm not initiating him right now, God forbid. I'm not doing anything like that. I'm just sharing what I've heard from my spiritual master. And through that, at the end, his doubt was resolved. That is how he has substantially been connected to our parampara. So I told him at the end, if you have doubts about Diksha, if you're having doubts about Diksha, if you're having doubts about Diksha Parampara or Shiksha Parampara, you know what's resolving your doubt? Not the Diksha Parampara. It's the Shiksha Parampara, right? Shiksha is the meaningful way that we actually substantially can be connected. Otherwise, as Saraswati Thakur said, our parampara is not a parampara of dead bodies, but of living souls experiencing Krishna Bhakti and giving it generation after generation. And if we don't emphasize that this is the essence of Krishna consciousness, again, it'll become some ritual. And then it'll be, I need 20 rupees, not 10, what are you doing, right? This is the essence. Achinoti yashastrartham. Yes, achinoti yashastrartham. This is in the Vayu Purana. This is quoted by Prabhupada and a few other of our acharyas, right? Acharya kirtitaha. The acharya kirtitaha is glorified as who? That person, achinoti. Ye ya shastrarthanam. That person who has understood the artha, the wealth of Shastra. Achare stapayatyapi. Right? That person then who has understood that wealth and who has established it in their behavior. This is the person who is the acharya according to the Shastras. Not the person who is saying the mantras in the ear, as important as that person is. The Diksha Guru is of course central to our life. But when the Shastras come to define acharya, they define that person who is giving shiksha, that person who is giving the artha of Shastra, not that person who is repeating Shastra, but that person who is going internal to Shastra, who has gone inside the Bhagavatam, who has experienced its spirit, who has taken that artha, pulled it out, and is distributing it. That is the acharya. That is a shiksha parampara, right? That is shiksha, and that is something of value. The acharya is not giving any, people will say, become a good person, right? Or people will say, sometimes we call second initiation Brahminical initiation, right? And that's fine. But that's really the secondary aspect of it, right? Prabhupada once said, one devotee once said, now that I've become a Brahmin, and Prabhupada said, why have you fallen down? You're a Vaishnav, right? So this is the essence, not any... The whole reason why we give Brahminical thread at the point of second initiation is to emphasize that these rituals are empty without the presence of bhakti. I was there at the Shraddh and I was saying all sorts of things, right? But one thing that was very sweet, and I was talking to a bit more of a Pakka Brahmana there, right? The whole time during the whole Shraddh, when all of these Smriti mantras are being recited, there was a kirtan happening in the back. And I asked the Brahmin, I said, oh, I couldn't even hear what you were reciting over the kirtan. I wasn't complaining, but maybe I think he thought I was, right? And then he said, well, of course. In the Kali Yuga, what is the point of all these Brahminical rituals if Harinam is not being chanted? Right? So, that is the point. Substance must be there. And so, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada is giving the thread not in order to give people an idea, here we have a hierarchy, right? Let us recreate these material hierarchies within our spiritual society. He's giving the thread to show that all of these material hierarchies are transcended the moment a person chants Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Right? The moment that this is chanted, right? There's one acharya, Assamese acharya, and he wrote he's bona fide. Our acharyas say that he's a bona fide preacher of Krishna consciousness. Honkor Dev, they say in the local language, but in Hindi or Sanskrit or whatever, we would say Shankaradev, right? But not Shankaracharya. He was a Vaishnava. And he has this beautiful poem. I've forgotten how it goes in Assamese, but in it he says, any person who is obsessed with their caste or their kula or anything, he said, upon seeing such a person, even a Chandala will lose his caste. He says the Chandala will lose his opulent birth upon seeing that person who thinks that their material situation is a glory beyond that of bhakti, or even comparable to bhakti. So in this way, we're seeing that all these material things, we should be careful to not use material things materially, but we should be even more careful not to use devotional things materially. Right? Because everything is spiritual, if used properly. But everything can be material if used incorrectly. So this is the nature of the material world. And this is the nature of all of these trappings. But what do we see? I remember, sorry, I'll wrap up in a few minutes, but what do we see? I remember thinking, again, sorry, I'm coming back to the Shraddha that happened recently. I remember thinking when I was there, I was seeing the mridanga playing. This mridanga playing was amazing. Like, these are people who live in like these Manipuri villages. All they do with their life is play mridanga. Like that is their whole life, their whole entertainment, their employment. They do nothing else. I saw it in the villages, like literally from childhood, right? They get initiated really young, like at 10, and they just play mridanga the rest of their life, right? That's all they do. So when I saw their mridanga playing, I was like, ISKCON has nice mridanga playing, but we're not competing with this, right? And then I remember when I was in Navadvip, I had to go buy some. My Shiksha Guru was like telling me to start tying my own threads, right? So I had to go buy the string for the thread. And anyways, and so as I was going through these shops, I remember I was talking to this one person. He was like at some like Sanskrit sort of like Babaji sort of like ashram there, and he was talking about shlokas. I was like, my God, like he was reciting whole sections. I would reference in English some section of the Bhagavatam, and he would recite like 5 verses like that. I was thinking, wow, this is pretty amazing, right? And I was thinking about this. And I was thinking, well, this is all very impressive, right? It's very impressive how they're playing mridanga. It's very impressive how this person is reciting Sanskrit, and maybe in ISKCON we don't have so much of that. That's what I was thinking. And then I was thinking, what do we have in the service of Srila Prabhupada? And I was thinking, and then I thought, oh, I know what we have. We have hundreds of temples spread around the world. We have Krishna consciousness being known outside the boundaries of India. I was thinking, you can recite lots of shlokas, but Mahaprabhu has said that in every town and village, Krishna's name will be chanted, right? In every town and village, right, the teachings of Krishna consciousness will be known, right? We can remember so many shlokas and have all this technical mastery, but in the service of Srila Prabhupada, we will realize those shlokas. We are fulfilling those shlokas. You can memorize them if you'd like, but when serving Prabhupada, you're engaging in the fulfillment of them, right? This is the nature of our Bhakti Vinod Dhara. The Bhakti Vinod Dhara is the river of our parampara flowing through. It can't be contained. Again, our Shiksha parampara defiling denying this idea that knowledge, that bhakti is contained within a ritual line of diksha. We go through and we see all these names jumping here and there, because our bhakti vinod dhara, it refuses to be contained. This is the nature of our lineage. When we study it, it refuses to be trapped in anything, right? Each generation is more radical than the previous one. In the six Goswamis' times, Gopal Bhatta Goswami gave Diksha because he was the most Pakka Brahmin out of all of the six Goswamis. So actually most of the initiations were done by Gopal Bhatta Goswami of the six Goswamis, right? But then, afterwards, we see the whole generation of Narottam Das Thakur, right? And all of these individuals going out and completely breaking out of that Brahminical fold, right? And then we see Saraswati Thakur envisioning the spread of Krishna consciousness outside, right? Outside of the realm of India. And then what happens? People are upset with it. People don't like it. Then Srila Prabhupada, he manifests that, right? This whole time, our Bhakti Vinod Dhara, at every generation, it is pushing against any limitation that's put upon it. So it's only natural that of all of the lineages, it is the Bhakti Vinod Dhara that pushes against the boundary of any geography and spreads itself all around the world. This is the nature of when Shiksha is emphasized. It will resist any limitation. That's why under the shelter of Srila Prabhupada, we are put in a unique place, even in the Gauriya Vaishnava world. Because under the shelter of Srila Prabhupada, it is a flow of mercy. It is a flow of shiksha. It is a flow of understanding that inherently refuses to be limited in any way. And we'll find this when we are engaged in service for Srila Prabhupada every single day. It is new, it is fresh, it is exciting. There are always new ideas occurring. There are always new things emerging because there's this emphasis to never get caught up into ritualism, to never get caught up into the externalities of things, but to always be pushing against any limitation in order to allow the flow of Bhakti Vinod to spread throughout the world. So in this way, you see, we're in a unique position to never fall into this trap. So we must be very careful, even though we are in such a good position to not fall into the trap of taking bhakti materially. We must be very, very careful still to not fall into it, because regardless, no matter how easy it is to follow that essence, we are Krishna bhuli she jeeb onadi bohirmukh, right? We are very well practiced at turning even the most spiritual things into material things. So, in this way, we should emphasize that shiksha, this flow of mercy, generation after generation, right? This is the essence of Krishna consciousness. And tying onto this will allow us to feel stably connected to the Sampradaya. Again, and then I will wrap up on this point. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Prabhupada, what is his pranam mantra, right? In his pranam mantra, we hear, Virudhapa Siddhanta Dvanta Harine. What do we hear? Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine. Right? Actually, it's interesting. Pranam mantras, we sometimes say we are blessed to have pranam mantras as Srila Prabhupada because Prabhupada wrote his own pranam mantra, so we get to understand how Srila Prabhupada saw himself. But actually, the whole idea of pranam mantras was introduced by Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada himself. So we're blessed to have pranam mantras at all, right? And so, actually, it was Ananta Vasudeva, I think, who wrote Srila Saraswati Thakur's pranam mantra, and all the previous acharyas ones. So Saraswati Thakur asked him to compose all of them. But still, that was an idea that Saraswati Thakur evoked. Again, why? So we can understand who are these personalities, not just that they are names that I present, my Diksha mantra came to this person, but Gaura Virbhava Bhumi Stvam. Now we understand who is Jagannath Das Babaji, right? Vipralambhara Sambodhe, who is Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, right? In this way, it emphasizes the personalism of the flow. And then Saraswati Thakur, who is he? Embodiment of Gauravani, right? The person who is removing Apasiddhanta. This is what embodies Acharya, this is what embodies Guru, and this is what embodies shelter in Krishna consciousness. Anyways, I had a few other points, but I will go over time. So, Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki jai.